Hi, I'm Carl Franklin. In this episode of Blazor Train, I welcome Chris Sainty back to the show for a lesson on how to build and run your Blazor apps in Docker containers. Now, I'm not just talking about pushing the right buttons at the right time. First, we'll do it by hand in VS Code, and then we'll let Visual Studio 2022 do the heavy lifting for us. But before we plunge into the tunnel through Docker Mountain, let's talk about why you'd want to use Docker. Well, one big reason to use containers in general is compatibility. Rather than relying on your machine or cloud platform to supply all the plumbing you need to support your app, you can box it up in a container, which will run on any machine or cloud platform. Once in a container, you can orchestrate, even automate the life cycle of multiple containers using tools like Kubernetes. Now, much has been written on containers in Docker, so today we're going to concentrate on the intersection of Docker and Blazor. And that's coming up right now, right here on Blazor Train! I'm very happy to welcome back to Blazor Train Mr. Chris Sainty from London. How are you, sir?
Yeah, I'm good, Carl. How are you?
Excellent. We had a request for containers. I noticed that you wrote a blog post about it a year or two ago.
Yeah. Pre-book. So
yeah. So I guess you this gave you a chance to go back through your code and look up things and make a presentation. So let's talk containers. Of course, I know the fundamentals, and I've even done some work with containers. But, it always seems to be going back to the documentation, and it's very technical, and especially things like YAML don't come naturally to me, so I have to study it really hard. And I'm hoping that you will shed some light in how easy this is, or it can be.
yeah, hopefully, fingers crossed. Much like you, I do find it something that I have to sort of go back to and refresh myself when I come to it. But we'll go over some stuff today, and hopefully we can clear some of this stuff up about how we can use Docker to host Blazor applications. Great. And how we can set them up. So examples are always best. So let's write some code and see what happens. So the first thing we're going to do is we'll create a new Blazor server app, and we'll have a look at how can we host a Blazor server app in a Docker container. I think that's.
Are you in a bash shell here, or is this the new?
This is Windows Terminal. So this is PowerShell core. So this is the cross-platform PowerShell version and things. So got it all set up with a custom prompt and everything. So that's
right. Yeah, fun. I saw this. Scott Hanselman showed it off.
That's it. Yeah. Scott and Nick Craver did one as well. So I kind of took from both of them and ended up with my version of things. So
really cool.
It's good fun. Right. So let's start off. So we'll do .NET New, and we'll go Blazor Server, and we're going to call this one. We'll call it Blazor Server Docker. Right.
Cool.
So let's just generate one of those first. Cool.
All right.
We'll go in there, and then I'm just going to spin up code for this.
Okay.
So, because we can just keep it focused on the Docker element of things. So, let's get that open. So, we've got our standard Blazor server application here. There's nothing special about it. We've just seen file new project essentially, but from the command prompt. So, how can we Dockerize this? Well, it's relatively straightforward actually. We're just going to add a new file here, and it's literally going to be called Dockerfile.
Yeah.
So this is sort of a file we're going to use to tell Docker how to build our image. So when it comes to Docker, there's kind of two elements. You have Docker images, which you can think of, I guess, in a similar vein to like a NuGet package. It's a packed up template of how to build instances of that application or whatever it happens to be. It's good to think of it, like say, in a way of like a bit like a template. So this is our starting point, and then we can create instances from that using the Docker run command, and that will spin up containers, which are just instances of these images. So the Docker file is going to help us create an image, and then we're going to create an instance of that image, which is a container to actually run the application. Cool. So I'm going to just copy in some lumps of code here because no one wants to watch me type for ages. So the first bit that we're going to do here is set up the image that's going to be used as the base for the actual running application. So this is going to be a really minimal image. And this is one of the key points about Docker, is that you can create really small applications that only contain the dependencies they require to run. Right. So what this is doing here is we're defining an image and we're giving it a tag of base. So we're just giving it like a label, if you like, which we'll see a bit further on.
So and this is just going to be our base image.
The base image, exactly. Yeah. And this is just the ASP.NET Core 6.0 runtime. Okay, so this is a .NET ASP.NET Core 6 runtime. Nothing else. It's got none of the build tools in it or anything like that. It's just what's needed to actually run the final application.
Cool.
So that's the first bit. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to define another image, and this one is a build image. So this is what we're going to use to actually build the application. So this time, the base image for our build is actually the .NET 6 SDK. So now we've got all of the build tools here that we need to actually build our application.
Okay.
So this is made up of a few layers and a few commands. So what we've got, first of all, like I said, we're starting off with the .NET 6 SDK. Then what we're going to do is use this command, workdir, which sets the working directory.
Yeah.
That's inside the container. So that's /source. So we're starting that there. Then what we're going to do is we're going to copy our project file into it from this file system. Okay, so we're going to copy over our Blazor server Docker CS proj file, which is here, and then the dot just means over to our, whatever the current working directory is in the container, which is just /source. We're then going to do a .NET restore on that CS proj file inside of that container, and then once that's done, we're going to do a copy of all the remaining files that make up this application and copy them over.
Now, if you don't mind, just explain .NET Restore.
Yeah, so .NET Restore, what that's going to do is it's going to execute and it's just going to restore any of the NuGet packages for this CS proj file. Now, once we've done that and we've copied over the remaining files that we need for or that make up the rest of the app, we can then call run, and then we're going to call .NET build, point to that CS proj file, and we're going to say we want it in release mode, and then we're going to specify an output folder. Again, this is on the Docker image, which is going to be /app/build. So that's
So these are subdirectories within the image itself.
Exactly. Yes.
You think of the image like its own file system.
Precisely. Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. Right. So that's the build step.
Okay.
So now we've got the build step set up. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to find a publish step. So what we're going to do here again is we're using that same from, except this time we're going to use the build as the base for what we're doing. So up here we've been using Microsoft's SDK and the runtime, but here we're actually just using this previous image that we had as the base. And this is one of the cool things.
I noticed you're not using base.
Yeah, no, because that's going to be, so we're going to come back to that right at the end. So this is what we're going to use as the final step to actually be the base for our running app. So we're going to, to publish our app, we're going to use what we had as build as the starting point. And then all we're going to do is an additional step is we're going to run .NET publish. Okay. And again, we're going to do that in release mode. And then we're going to output those files into this app/publish subdirectory.
Okay.
Again, that's inside of our Docker image. So now we've got the final bit here. So the final bit here this is where that base image comes into play.
Oh, yeah.
So this is what we defined at the top here. So what we're saying here is from base, and this is going to be our final. This is actually what's going to be what our application is going to run in. We're going to set the working directory to /app, and then we're going to copy everything from the publish image, and we're going to copy from that app publish, which we can see marries up to where our output from our publish command was.
Yeah, I get it. So your base image is just for running. You're exposing port 80 and port 443, which is SSL.
Exactly.
And the other two are for building and publishing. And once you have everything in that publish app, then you copy everything over to a new image called final using the base, which is exposing the ports, and everything that was published gets copied into that. Yeah, it makes sense now.
Perfectly correct. And then the great thing is all this stuff up here will then just get discarded because we don't need it anymore, because we only need the final output. And then the final step we have is just to set the entry point for this. When we spin this up as a container, we're just going to say as an entry point, run the .NET command and basically just execute our Blazor server Docker DLL. And that will spin up our app, and that's it. So that's our Docker file. So that's everything we need to kind of define the image that we're doing. So now we've got that, we need to actually build this. So if we go back to the command line here, we can build using the Docker CLI. So I'm going to call Docker build, and then I'm just going to give this image a tag. And this is just a way of identifying this image. So this is going to be called Blazor-server-docker. And then the final argument here, this dot, is just to give it the build context. So this is where the build is going to be based in our file system. So in this case, I just want it to be within the current folder. So if I execute that.
Yeah, while you're executing this, I just want to mention that we didn't tell people they had to install Docker. So there's Docker for Windows, right? And it's just a quick install. You just have
definitely.
To do that.
Docker Desktop for Windows is probably the best thing to do. Install that, and then the CLI and everything was all part of that.
Yeah, it's all there.
So that's it. Our Docker image is now built.
That's some low contrast text right there, man. I can't even read
that
it.
hasn't come through too well, has it? That's it doesn't look too bad for me, but that's not great for this. So I
all right. Well, I'm sure it'll look better on the final video.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. So cool. So that's all built now. So now that our image is built, in fact, actually, I can bring up Docker Desktop, actually, and we can have a look at this. So this is actually Docker Desktop running, and you can see that this is actually the image right here. In fact, this is one from 5 hours ago when I was testing things. But but this is our image sitting right there, and that's sitting ready to go. And we can now create instances of that that are called containers. So to do that, we can use the Docker run command. And then what we need to do is bind a port on the host system, so my computer here, to the port that's exposed by the image. So we're exposing port 80, so I'm binding here. I'm saying bind my local port 8080 to port 80 on the container.
Yep.
This -D means it's running in daemon mode, which effectively means it runs in the background. I don't keep an interactive prompt for it. And then I'm specifying the name of the image that I want to create a container from. So that's our Blazor server Docker. So let's run this up and see what happens now. Cool. So if I now go and run Docker PS, so this is basically showing what's running. So at the top here, you can see that we've now got a container ID that's going on there. So that's our container instance. And this is the image that it's based from, which is our Blazor server Docker image. And then it's got the command that it used to execute. And you can see some stuff like when it was created and how long it's been up for and all this kind of stuff. So now we've got that. Let's open up a web browser and we'll go to localhost and we'll go to 8080. And there we go. We've now got our Blazor server application and running inside of our Docker image. But you can see it all works fine. And
what's interesting is you don't need Kestrel or IIS Express or any of those things, do you? Or is that all copied into from the publish? Is that all copied into the container?
Yeah, so that's a really good question. So I guess this is with a Blazor server scenario. I guess that's being hosted by a Kestrel instance that comes from the ASP.NET Core runtime. I'm assuming there's one in there. Okay, there must be something hosting it and actually serving
makes sense.
Files.
Yeah.
What we're going to do next, though, is to have a look at Blazor WebAssembly, and that is a bit of a different story because in that scenario, we do actually have to specify something to host those files. So we've got this running. So let's leave that running for now. What we'll do is we'll go up a directory and we'll create a Blazor WebAssembly application and see how that differs. So what we'll do here is do another .NET new, and this is going to be a Blazor WASM. And this time, what we call it, we'll call this Blazor WASM Docker. Like so. So let that go through. Cool. And
what occurs to me here is that all that boilerplate stuff that you wrote in the Dockerfile could be automated based on the name of the project.
Yeah, definitely. So same kind of scenario again. We've got our standard Blazor WebAssembly app standalone here. We're not using the hosted version or anything for this one.
Right.
So now we've got that. Now, there's something we're going to do slightly different here. There's actually two files we're going to add this time because Blazor WebAssembly, as we know, or most of us know at least, is compiled to static files. So we do need something that's going to serve those files out.
Yeah.
So to do that, we need a web server. Now, in this case, what we're going to use is actually a really small, compact, very fast web server called Nginx to do that. So,
and by the way, Nginx is what practically every Docker hosted, web application uses. It's absolutely standard. Yeah,
definitely. So we've got basically what we're going to do is specify a configuration file for Nginx conf, and we're actually going to copy that over into our Docker container when we get going, and we're going to actually use an image that's got Nginx built into it. Nice. So we're just going to overwrite the default configuration with the one that we've specified here. So generally, this is actually a very minimal config for Nginx. There's not a huge amount of interesting stuff going on here. We're including all of the meme types that Nginx supports by default. You used to have to actually specify an additional one for WebAssembly because it didn't actually. When I originally wrote my blog posts, Nginx didn't support WebAssembly in its default meme types, but it's actually included in there now. So we only need this one line. Then we've just got a little bit of the configuration for the server. So it's going to listen on port 80. We've specifying here the route where the files are going to be served from. So this is going to be inside of the Docker container. And then the sort of quite an important bit for Blazor WebAssembly is this line here. So what this is doing is essentially saying whenever Nginx can't find a file, to redirect that request back to the index.html. And because obviously Blazor WebAssembly uses client-side routing, this is quite important because we're going to be asking it to serve pages that don't physically exist. We want Blazor's router to handle those. So this is going to make sure we always come back to the Blazor app, whether that's to show a 404 because it's a genuine unknown file, or to actually load the correct route. So that's our Nginx config. And then just as we did before, we'll now specify a Dockerfile. So we'll go a bit quicker this time because we all know kind of a bit what's going on here. So we're going to start off with a build image this time, just because it doesn't really matter which way around you do it. So we'll start off with this. Again, same as before, it's the full .NET SDK, .NET 6 SDK with all the build tools and everything. Again, we set the working directory inside the container. We copy over the project file to that source folder on the container. We do .NET Restore like we did before. We copy the remaining files, and then we do a build, a release build, and then output it to the app build folder. So very similar to how we had things before. Next, same as before, we have a publish image, and this is based on the build image. And again, same thing as it was before. Nothing particularly different there.
Okay.
And then we have the final image. Now this is slightly different. So this time round, we are actually using an Nginx Alpine image as our base. So this is a very, very minimal version of Linux Alpine that's got which has got an Nginx install in it. And that's basically it. So we're going to set our working directory inside of that. And we're going to say, copy everything from our publish image. And we're going to say from our app publish www root folder, which is where the final application files from our Blazor WebAssembly application end up once we've published them. They're all the static files that get produced. Copy them into that working directory. And the other thing we're going to do is we're going to copy our Nginx conf that we defined here and copy that over the default one that's included in the image. So we pass in our correct settings that we want.
So a question I can imagine the viewers are having right now is, how do we know where Nginx :Alpine is? How does your Docker file find it?
Yeah,
or how does Docker find it?
Yeah, good question. So basically, there's a huge repository similar to NuGet called Docker Hub, and essentially Docker is going to reach out when it sees one of these image names, and it's going to query that from Docker Hub, and it's going to go and download the image that matches that. If it can't find one that matches it, then there'll be an error, obviously, and it will it will stop the build.
So this is a really safe image to use.
Yeah, so this is an official image. A lot of the stuff that is through Docker Hub has all been verified and checked and stuff like that. So it's a good place to get things from. There are lots of other different container registries sort of popping up, and you can even create your own. And Azure has a service where you can host your own container images privately or publicly, whatever you want to do.
Okay.
I guess it's no different really, I think, to installing a NuGet package. You should always know where it's coming from.
Sure.
all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, makes sense.
Cool. So now we've done that, we're going to do the same thing as we did before. So we're going to go back over to our command prompt here, and we're going to issue the same build command, except this time we're going to tag it as Blazor WASM Docker instead. So we'll let that build. And then once that's finished, let that run through.
Quick.
And what's quite cool about this is if you do subsequent builds after you make a little bit of a change to something and then you do a new build, all these various different layers that Docker goes through are all cached. So it will only actually rebuild the stuff that changes, which means that the first build can be quite long, but subsequent builds can actually be really, really quick. Because it's
kind of like Visual Studio does the same thing with builds.
Exactly. Yeah, definitely. Cool. So now that's built, we can do the same thing as before and start a container instance. So we're going to, again, call Docker run. This time we're going to bind port 8181 because we're using 8080 for our Blazor server one. So we'll run that up. Again, we're going to use -d, and we've got the tag there. So we've got that. And then if we come over and let's change that to 8181. And there we go. We've now got our Blazor WASM application running, and everything works as before. And we've still got our Blazor server one over here, and that's still running as it did before.
Brilliant, as they say.
So yeah, so that's basically it. That's Dockerizing Blazor server and Blazor WebAssembly apps. I think the only other scenario that we've not really looked at is maybe a Blazor WebAssembly hosted application, which I think people might look at as being a bit more complex because obviously there's kind of different parts to that. So what I thought, just to sort of change things up a little bit, is we'd go in Visual Studio to have a look at this one. Okay. So I'm going to create a new project, and we'll go Blazor WebAssembly app. We'll call it Blazor WASM hosted Docker. We'll call it that. Cool. We'll make sure we set it as a hosted, and then we'll click create. So I thought I'd show it through Visual Studio this time around because I've been showing you everything manually. It's quite good, I guess, to know what's going on under the hood. But actually, Visual Studio's got some really cool tools built into it that, as you mentioned earlier, Carl, takes away a lot of the boilerplate.
Yeah. Now, I noticed also that I think there might have been a checkbox when you created that for add Docker support, like when you create the project, but you didn't do that. You're going to add it after the fact, which I see everybody doing that in their blog posts. What's the reason for that?
I guess it's maybe a bit of a bigger catch-all. I guess when you could do it when you create a new project like that, which is cool. But a lot of people aren't creating new projects. A lot of people are working with existing applications and they're maybe modernizing and they want to move to Docker. So I tend to show it this way around purely because it covers people who have got existing apps, not just people who are creating new apps. I think when you're creating a new app, all this stuff is a lot easier.
So I guess you have more control when you do it after the fact. You have more things that you can tweak, do you? Or is it the same?
No, not particularly. I think it still adds the same stuff. It still works the same way. You can still get to the files afterwards and change them however you want. Okay. I guess it's more just letting people know who have already got apps where these things are. I think, I say, when you're creating a new app, you can kind of see that menu option there and you can just select it and it just works. And it's just a non-event really. It just works, and which is really cool. But when you've got something existing, I always think it's harder to reason how do you add something into it. So that's why I do it this way anyway, at least. Okay, good. So what I'm going to do is start. So we've got the server project here. So this is what we're going to. This is where we're going to add the Docker file because this is actually what's hosting everything. So I'm going to right click on this, and then I can come down and I can go add. And then I can say Docker support. So I think if I can zoom in here. Yep. So we have that menu option available. And we can go and add that. So let's go back in there. We can go Docker support. And then we get this option here. So this is going to be the target OS. And what this means when it says target OS is where are our containers going to run? Okay. So this is not necessarily what operating system we're using right now. Oh, so I see. Where do you want your application to run?
So in other words, the operating system that loads inside the container.
No, this will actually be the hosting operating system.
The hosting operating system. Oh, all right.
Yeah. So if you're going to run your apps, for example, you're building web apps, you're going to run them on Linux instances in Azure, for example, or something like that. So you're going to want a Linux target OS here. If you're going to run them on Windows-based Docker services in Azure, then you'd want to pick Windows. Most people generally, I think, with web apps nowadays, pick Linux.
It's cheaper. Yeah,
exactly. So we'll go with Linux. So we'll select that.
Okay.
And there we go. So now we've got. Let's just zoom this in a little bit. So
it made the Docker file for us.
So yeah, basically it's done everything that we just did manually, but it's done it for us, and that's quite cool. So you can see
really cool.
It's created that base image like we had before using the .NET 6 runtime. So that's going to be what the actual final application runs on. Then we've got the build step as we did before. So again, working directory, and then it's copying in all 3 project files because obviously we need all 3 to make this work. And then it's got relative files on the file system in the container, in the image as well, sorry.
Right.
It's going to call .NET Restore on the server project. It's the host project. Copy in all the remaining files. Then it's going to go set the working directory on the image to the server folder. And then it's going to build from the server project as the starting point. Once that's done, it's going to call publish on the server project. And then we have the final image again, which is very similar to what we had before. It's just going to copy everything from the publish folder into the current app folder on the final image. And then we're using the .NET CLI again to kick off the application. So that's all good to go. And what's really cool here is it's all integrated. So you can see now up in the toolbar here, I'll just zoom in there. We've got Docker as an option when we want to start this application. So normally up there we have sort of it's either set to IS Express or maybe whatever the host project is. But now we can actually run it as Docker. So
now you still have to have Docker installed in order to get this support, right?
Exactly right. Yeah. Whatever happens, you need Docker Desktop installed. And that's going to, Visual Studio is going to do all the work of hooking into that for you.
Great.
But yeah, you are still going to need it there. And what's cool with this is you can even do debugging through this. So you could have breakpoints set and it can run it up in a container, but you can still hit your breakpoints and all that kind of cool stuff.
Yeah.
So after a second or two, it gets going. And then you can see here, we now got our Blazor WASM hosted application. It's all running. And you can kind of see here back in Visual Studio, we've got some extra windows popped up now. So you can see that it's got a little console here for starting and stopping the various containers that are running and things like that. And that's basically all of the spectrum, really, when it comes to Docker.
It really is. I mean, once you have those containers, now you can move on to other topics like Kubernetes, or if you want to host them in Azure. Is there any place you can point us to get started in that realm?
Oh, what with Kubernetes and things like that?
Well, with Kubernetes, and also doesn't Azure has a container service, right?
It does, yeah.
An orchestration service.
That's it, yeah. Because Azure's actually got a really a really new service actually that came out in the last couple of months, which I think is Azure Container Apps.
Yeah, something like that.
Something like that, which is a really low friction way to get started with sort of larger scale container systems, where I think it still works with Kubernetes, but it hides a lot of that complexity from you and takes away a lot of that management from you. And
we had AKS before, Azure Kubernetes Service.
Yeah.
So, and that's going to be used if you, I don't know, what's the difference between AKS and this new stuff? Is the new stuff just so high level that you don't even realize you're in a container kind of thing?
Yeah, it could be. In all fairness, I've not had a chance to have a really good play with it yet. It's on my
there's an opportunity for another episode.
Exactly. Yeah, I think let me have a little play, and then maybe we can come back and have a little comparison of the two. That sounds like a good idea.
That sounds good. But for now, you could throw, if you've got a nice DevOps system going on, you can just throw this over the wall and say, here are your images, here are your containers.
Exactly right. Yeah. I mean, there's even Azure App Service. You can still host a container in an Azure App Service. It's, I think some people argue like what the point of that scenario is, but it does give you, I guess what you're taking there is the benefit of the portability of containers. It removes that whole "it worked on my machine" scenario from things. So, I think it has its place like most things. So that could probably be the easiest way to get started. I covered that scenario. I think it was in one of my blog posts.
Chris, we're going to put the URL to your blog post up right there.
Ah, cool.
So
awesome.
People should be able to go to that and read more. Thank you so much.
No problem. Anytime.
This is great stuff. Now back to you in the studio, Carl. So what's next? Well, obviously orchestration. Azure Kubernetes Service, Kubernetes itself, however you want to orchestrate your containers, now's a good time to learn about that. Maybe we'll do that in the future. Who knows? Hey, thanks for riding the rails with me today. This is where I jump off. I'll see you next time. Blaze the trail.